Let me tell you about one of the steel capitals of the world that fell, and all that is left there is the ruins and a large story. The story of steel that left Chicago with scars and ruins forever. Hundreds of thousands of people lost their jobs. Many people were affected by the closing of the steel industry, but many others were affected by what it did. As soon as the first workers were let out, there were instantly thousands of couch potatoes. The workers said they felt like they were nothing. Imagine losing everything. It provides you with food, shelter, water, and the ability to support a family. Imagine losing all of that, making it impossible to find another job that does the same. Losing it and never being able to get it back. This would break many people, as it did. Many started doing drugs, gambling, drinking, doing drugs, and some even committed suicide. And for the rest, they struggled for a long, long time. Let's start at the beginning. The end of the 1970s, when Elvis had just died and everyone was listening to Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd through their cassette tapes. This was the start of the almost 30-year decline of steel in Chicago and America. It started when Chicago put restrictions on pollution that steel companies produce, thus making it harder and more expensive to make steel. And every time they made even a small mistake, it would cost them thousands of dollars. This made for competition much easier and less risky, and their steel was much better since they didn't have restrictions on their steel company's pollution. Mistakes were made because we're humans, but these mistakes caused the companies a lot of money, and since they were losing this money, a lot of people started looking into foreign competition because they weren't losing money to mistakes. Since everyone was looking at foreign competition, a lot of people stopped paying and getting steel from the steel companies in Chicago, thus causing them to shut down. As said, they employed hundreds of thousands of employees, and them releasing hundreds of thousands of employees all at the same time resulted in massive consequences. As soon as the steel companies let their workers go, there were immediately protests. Let me tell you a little about these protests. Hundreds of thousands of people losing their jobs? Yeah, they were mad, and they were not just going to let it go like that. So they protested, like anyone would when they're mad about something. When they came to the realization that protests weren't going to do anything because the steel mills were already closed and you can't reopen the steel mills just because you're mad, they sat into a very depressed mood. Very, very depressed. And that is when the drinking and drugs got very big. Actually, a time high for them. You would see all the steel workers at bars, drinking to get their minds off the tragedy that had just happened. No one knew what to do. They didn't have the money to move. Many tried to get jobs, but only a few did. So many struggled. Some even went homeless. That is what happened right after. But that is just the beginning. Soon after the closing, the rest of the world found out that one of the steel capitals of the world that was in America had just closed. And that is when it was a time low, a historical low of unemployment in Chicago. 40% of people were unemployed. 40% of millions that lived in Chicago were unemployed. That's a lot, especially for one of the biggest cities in America. Everyone knew about this. This put a bad impression on Chicago, especially its southeast side, with an already bad history of race riots and being poorer than most areas in Chicago. The area began to turn into a smoggy, polluted, deadly-looking place with a whole bunch of ruins from the steel that there once was. Many people started to look at the bright side. The bright side that it was polluting the atmosphere, and now it couldn't pollute anymore. But there still was the dark side of the workers. The workers that were so sad. The workers that felt like they had no meaning. Some of the workers had moved on, but many hadn't. The only ones who moved on were the ones that got better jobs. Many still depressed and remembering what their life once was. But soon, it faded to the dust, and people forgot about it. Let me bring you to today, when it is just arising from the dead again. There are many stories about this side of Chicago, just no one knows about them. And now you know one. The ruins are still there. The people's families, many still there, telling the story of their parents that once worked at steel mills and once experienced that fall. Remember, everything has a story. Even the smallest things. Everything. So if you're ever wondering about anything, and even if you aren't wondering, ask about the story.